Before the Fellowship was the greatest story you've never heard. I'm Greg.
I'm Cameron.
I'm
Dan. You're muted. You were muted.
Join us as we read and react to the Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien. Last time we began of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. Sauron fled into Middle-earth following Morgoth's capture. Elves of Beleriand and Osiriand made their way eastward as the world was reshaped, and Beleriand was destroyed. Sauron sought to gain control over the elves and was successful in winning over the Noldor elves by sharing knowledge and lore. The elves created several rings of power, and Sauron created the One Ring to control the others, putting much of his own strength into the ring. The elves quickly became aware of his plans and removed their rings. In anger, Sauron made war with the elves and demanded they hand over the rings. The elves fled and were able to save the three rings, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya. Today we continue of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, beginning on page 288 of the second edition. From that time, war never ceased between Sauron and the elves, and Eregion was laid waste, and Celebrimbor slain, and the doors of Moria were shut. In that time, the stronghold and refuge of Imladris, that men called Rivendell, was founded by Elrond Half-Elven, and long it endured. But Sauron gathered into his hands all the remaining rings of power, and he dealt them out to the other peoples of Middle-earth, hoping thus to bring under his sway all those that desired secret power beyond the measure of their kind. 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to men he gave 9, for men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will. And all those rings that he governed he perverted, the more easily since he had a part in their making. And they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. The dwarves indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. They used their rings only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and an overmastering of greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring. But all those hordes long ago were plundered, and the dragons devoured them. And of the 7 rings, some were consumed in fire, and some Sauron recovered. Men proved easier to ensnare. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. They had, as it seemed, unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk, if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in worlds invisible to mortal men. But too often they beheld only the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. And one by one, sooner or later, according to their native strength and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning, they fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore, and under the domination of the one, which was Sauron's. And they became forever invisible, save to him that wore the ruling ring, and they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgul were they, the Ringwraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. Now Sauron's lust and pride increased until he knew no bounds, and he determined to make himself master of all things in Middle-earth, and to destroy the elves, and to compass, if he might, the downfall of Numenor. He brooked no freedom, nor any rivalry, and he named himself Lord of the Earth. A mask he still could wear, so that if he wished, he might deceive the eyes of men, seeming to them wise and fair. But he ruled rather by force and fear, if they might avail. And those who perceived his shadow spreading over the world called him the Dark Lord, and named him the Enemy. And he gathered again under his government all the evil things of the days of Morgoth that remained on earth or beneath it. And the orcs were at his command and multiplied like flies. Thus the black years began, which the elves called the days of flight. In that time many of the elves of Middle-earth fled into Lindon, and thence over the seas never to return. And many were destroyed by Sauron and his servants. But in Lindon, Gil-galad still maintained his power, and Sauron dared not as yet to pass the mountains of Eregion, nor to assail the havens. And Gil-galad was aided by the Númenóreans. Elsewhere Sauron reigned, and those who would be free took refuge in the fastnesses of wood and mountain, and ever fear pursued them. In the east and south, well nigh all men were under his dominion, and they grew strong in those days, and built many towns and walls of stone, and they were numerous and fierce in war, and armed with iron. To them Sauron was both king and god, and they feared him exceedingly, for he surrounded his abode with fire. Yet there came at length a stay in the onslaught of Sauron upon the Westlands. For, as is told in the Akallabeth, he was challenged by the might of Numenor. So great was the power and splendor of the Númenóreans in the noontide of their realm that the servants of Sauron would not withstand them. And hoping to accomplish by cunning what he could not achieve by force, he left Middle-earth for a while and went to Numenor as a hostage of Tar-Calion, the king. And there he abode until at the last, by his craft, he had corrupted the hearts of most of that people and set them at war with the Valar, and so compassed their ruin as he had long desired. But that ruin was more terrible than Sauron had foreseen, for he had forgotten the might of the lords of the West in their anger. The world was broken, and the land was swallowed up, and the seas rose over it, and Sauron himself went down into the abyss. But his spirit arose and fled back on a dark wind to Middle-earth, seeking a home. There he found that the power of Gil-galad had grown great in the years of his absence, and it was spread now over the wide regions of the north and west, and had passed beyond the misty mountains and the great river, even to the borders of Greenwood the Great, and was drawing nigh to the strong places where once he had dwelt secure. Then Sauron withdrew to his fortress in the Black Land and meditated war. In that time, those of the Númenóreans who were saved from the destruction fled eastward, as is told in the Akallabeth. The chief of these were Elendil the Tall, and his sons Isildur and Anarion. Kinsmen of the king they were, descendants of Elros, but they had been unwilling to listen to Sauron, and had refused to make war on the lords of the West. Manning their ships with all who remained faithful, they forsook the land of Numenor ere ruin came upon it. They were mighty men, and their ships were strong and tall, but the tempest overtook them, and they were borne aloft on hills of water, even to the clouds, and they descended upon Middle-earth like birds of the storm. Elendil was cast upon the waves in the land of Lindon, and he was befriended by Gil-galad. Thence he passed up the river Lune, and beyond Ered-luin. He established his realm, and his people dwelt in many places in Eriador, about the courses of the Lune and the Baranduin. But his chief city was at Annúminas, beside the water of Lake Neuenel. At Fornost upon the north downs also the Númenóreans dwelt, and in Cardolan, and in the hills of Rudar, and towers they raised upon Emin Berid, and upon Amon Sul, and there remains many barrows and ruined works in those places. But the towers of Emin Berid still look toward the sea. Isildur and Anarion were borne away southwards, and at the last they brought their ships upon the great river Anduin that flows out of Rovanion into the western sea in the Bay of Belfalas. And they established a realm in those lands that were after called Gondor, whereas the northern kingdom was named Arnord. Long before, in the days of their powers, the mariners of Númenor had established a haven and strong places about the mouths of Anduin, in despite of Sauron in the Black Land that lay nigh upon the east. In the later days to this haven came only the faithful of Númenor, and many therefore of the folk of the coastlands in that region were in whole or in part akin to the elf friends and the people of Elendil, and they welcomed his sons. The chief city of this southern realm was Osgiliath, through the midst of which the great river flowed. And the Númenóreans built there a great bridge, upon which there were towers and houses of stone, wonderful to behold. And tall ships came up out of the sea to the quays of the city. Other strong places they built also upon either hand. Minas Ithil, the tower of the rising moon, eastward upon a shoulder of the mountains of shadow, as a threat to Mordor, and to the westward Minas Anor, the tower of the setting sun, at the feet of the mountain Mindoluin, as a shield against the wild men of the Dales. In Minas Ithil was the house of Isildur, and in Minas Anor the house of an Anorion. But they shared the realm between them, and their thrones were set side by side in the great hall of Osgiliath. These were the chief dwellings of the Númenóreans in Gondor. But other works, marvelous and strong, they built in the land in the days of their power, at the Argonath, and at Aglarond, and at Eric, and in the circle of Angrenost, which men called Isengard. They made the pinnacle of Orthanc, an unbreakable stone. Many treasures and great heirlooms of virtue and wonder the exiles had brought from Númenor, and of these the most renowned were the 7 stones and the white tree. The white tree was grown from the fruit of Nimloth the fair, that stood in the courts of the king at Armenelos in Númenor, ere Sauron had burned it, and Nimloth was in its turn descended from the tree of Tirion. There was an image of the eldest trees, white Telperion, which Yavanna caused to grow in the land of the Valar. The tree, memorial of the Eldar and of the light of Valinor, was planted in Minas Ithil before the house of Isildur, since he it was that had saved the fruit from the destruction. But the stones were divided. 3 Elendil took, and his sons each 2. Those of Elendil were set in towers upon Emid Berid, and upon Amon Sul, and in the city of Annúminas. But those of his sons were at Minas Ithil, and Minas Anor, and at Orthanc, and in Osgiliath. Now these stones had this virtue, that those who looked therein might perceive in them things far off, whether in place or in time. For the most part, they revealed only things near to another kindred stone, for the stones each called to each. But those who possessed great strength of will and of mind might learn to direct their gaze whither they would. Thus, the Númenóreans were aware of many things that their enemies wished to conceal, and little escaped their vigilance in the days of their might. It is said that the towers of Emin Bereid were not built indeed by the exiles of Númenor, but were raised by Gil-galad for Elendil, his friend, and the seeing stone of Emin Bereid was set in Elostirion, the tallest of the towers. Thither Elendil would repair, and thence he would gaze out over the sundering seas when the yearning of exile was upon him. And it is believed that thus he would at whiles see far away even the tower of Avalone upon Erisea, where the master stone abode and yet abides. These stones were gifts of the Eldar to Amandil, father of Elendil, for the comfort of the faithful of Númenor in their dark days, when the elves might come no longer to that land under the shadow of Sauron. They were called the Palantiri, those that watch from afar. But all those that were brought to Middle-earth long ago were lost. In summary, Sauron continues war with the elves. Eregion is laid waste and Celebrimbor is slain. Elrond establishes Rivendell. Sauron successfully collects the other rings of power and gives 7 to the dwarves and 9 to men. The dwarves prove hard to tame, but the influence of the rings leads them to seek great wealth, often to their demise. Men prove easier to rule. The 9 kings grow in might and power, but ultimately succumb to the power of the One Ring and are made Ringwraiths, Sauron's most powerful servants. Sauron grows in power, gathering orcs and other beasts, and ruling over most men in the south and east. Sauron leaves Middle-earth for a time, as is recounted in Akallabeth. When he returns, he finds that Gil-galad's realm has grown even beyond the Misty Mountains. The Númenóreans arrive in Middle-earth. Elendil lands at Lindon, befriends Gil-galad, and establishes the kingdom of Arnor. Isildur and Anarion land at the mouths of Anduin and establish the kingdom of Gondor. The Palantiri are spread throughout Arnor and Gondor. That was like a 10 out of 10 reading. Some of them aren't the best. This is a good one. It's kind of
dense.
It captured some of these things that when we see Gondor in The Lord of the Rings, it's fallen, right? It's at its low point.
Mm-hmm.
It's in its evening, the winter of its time, but
in a waning.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting to hear this description of its founding and the extent of the realm and the like we see Osgiliath just in ruins the whole time. But to hear that was kind of the main city of the realm of Gondor and powerful fortress. Very interesting.
Yeah, remind me what is Morgoth doing? I mean, this covered. There was summaries of other times.
I think Morgoth is in the void right now.
So he's in the void because it's it says and he gathered again under his government all evil things of the days of Morgoth. And I just couldn't remember what is Morgoth like? What's he actually doing? Is he just falling down the abyss like Gandalf in the shafts of Khazad Dûm? Or
I think he's in that shadow prison, just locked beyond the confines of the world, whatever that place is.
Yeah, he's
the Tesseract.
He was thrust through.
He's with Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
It says, this is from 254. It says, but Morgoth himself, the Valar, thrust through the door of night, beyond the walls of the world, into the timeless void. So, not the nicest place to be.
No. Yeah, there's so many dense parts to it. I mean, you've got like imagery from Lord of the Rings, as you already mentioned. You know, we're thinking of Gondor and.
It was cool to hear about the rings again and how they influence the dwarves and how they influence men.
Yeah.
And how, so it says here, but to men he gave 9, 4 men proved in this matter as in others the readiest to his will. Like he gave them more because it was like, it's going to be easy to get these men, you know, they're more valuable. So that's why he gave them more. And then dwarves were a little more stubborn and hard to tame, but their love of wealth, you know.
I think this is a Peter Jackson summary of it because that struck me as well, Cameron. But because he says, Galadriel says at the beginning of the Fellowship, and nine rings were gifted to the race of men who, above all else, desire power.
Power.
I don't think that's Tolkien there. It might be from like Lord of the Rings or some other thing, but it seems like it is summarizing that point that you just made.
Yeah, it's probably a screenwriter looking at this chapter and just like, how do we summarize what happened?
Yeah.
I felt that with the Rings of Power show as well. The paragraphs on 290. But funnily enough, it's like the difference between somebody like studying it versus just being like, all right, what kind of happened? Like, okay, there's that character, there's that character.
Yeah, they were very loose with it.
Yeah, they just like threw it all together. Whereas you can see, like, I respect the Lord of the Rings films more now, which is odd because they did deviate a lot from some of the beloved characters and plot points. And that is frustrating as a lover of the books, right? But when you see that, like, they've gone into the Silmarillion and they've just been mining it, and it's a love affair. It's a lot more respect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really beautiful. And now I'm going to say something stupid, but the dwarves who are less less easy to tame,
tall,
it
that's
says,
correct.
prove tough and hard to tame.
They are shorter.
I was thinking, like, you know how they say, well, I don't know if they say this. Maybe I just think this. Like, sometimes if people are kind of empty-minded, you know, it's like you can't really manipulate them because they're not, like, there's.
I don't think it's like that. I think they captured it well in the films as well by giving them Scottish accents, because the Scots are very, like, stubborn and, like, hard to move as a people. They're hardy, strong-willed, and it's like they know what
bristly,
they want and they
like,
stick to it. It's like, although that part, Greg, is interesting because the last line of it, like, they were lost and were plundered by dragons that devoured them. And of the 7 rings, some were consumed in the fire, and some Sauron recovered. Which that line, "some Sauron recovered," like, allows your imagination to go to him like slaying a dragon, knowing that there's a ring in it. So to collect it before it gets consumed in the fire of his belly, like just like ripping open the dragon and just like, it's mine.
Yeah, I'm not saying they're dumb. I'm just saying they're single-minded. They're single. They're focused on pursuing wealth.
Yeah, they're like stubborn.
They're like a Scottish thistle.
There you go. That's the national flower.
Yeah.
It's even cool that there is such a thing as the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings. Like, that's just something in history we've never heard about, except in one line. That each of the, I guess, 7 dwarf kings had a horde.
Or
and the
queens, as Rings of Power rightly showed us.
Yep. Or tweens.
Yeah,
you know,
you're right, Cameron. It's one of those things that it's just a footnote in this, but your imagination can just run wild, and there's so many stories. That little line is just full of stories, untold stories.
Here's another cool image that stuck out to me was when the Númenóreans crash upon Middle Earth from the Tempest. It says they were borne aloft in hills of water, even to the clouds. And they descended upon Middle Earth like birds of the storm. Can you imagine that? Like a typhoon-sized wave, or even taller? It would have to be taller than that to reach the clouds. That's insane.
I wonder if at that point Tolkien had just finished reviewing Perelandra by C.S. Lewis, where there's those waves of the land that go up and down.
He's like, I'll show you.
Yeah, I can write that better, I think. The next paragraph as well, like after the dwarves, the men being subdued by the rings is just so good. And doesn't it like make you understand the like the sense of just like these Nazgul, like they're not willful servants of Morgoth. They are
Thralls.
pitiful thralls. They are just at his mercy. They have no rest. They just wander in wispiness.
Yeah, what a great line. Where does it's somewhere in here where it says that life became, they had as it seemed unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. Just this curse of this miserable existence. One thing too that I thought was interesting in this section, it points out
they lose the gift of Iluvatar.
Yep. Which, if you want to, go ahead, Greg, talk.
No. I did just keep going.
No, that was it. No, just wanted to make that point.
They've like forfeited it in a way or something. Well, I was just gonna say that they eventually all fall to the influence of Sauron, right? But it says that one by one they fell. Sooner or later, according to their native strength and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning. And so there were some that were good men and good kings, but the rings took their toll over time, and eventually all of them.
Hope. There's no hope. Yeah.
It's kind of like what we see with the One Ring, right? Where some people in the story of the Lord of the Rings wish to use it and to wield it like a weapon. And Gandalf rightly tells them that it can't be done. You know, anyone, especially the most powerful, would be corrupted by it. It's the same here, where even these good men, you know, they give into this temptation for, you know, the gaining of power or glory or wealth, and
it must have been gradual,
right?
Because eventually they just keep living longer and longer. And then, like, they crack the code that so many scientists are trying to crack. Like, how do we end aging? Like, how can we use AI or like machines to have our lives like persist forever? And it's like, well, gradually, you know, if you get to that point, then eventually your life becomes unendurable. It persists like Gollum, but
it reminds me of the same kind of tragic consequence that is afforded to the main character in No Country for Old Men. Who's like, do you remember that film? Mm-hmm. It's a film about a guy. It's a Coen Brothers movie. It's really dark and really bleak. He finds cash and steals it, but then like this psychopath is set after him. And the guy who stole the cash thinks he's got a plan. I can do this. It's fine. I've got this. He's actually really good. He's good-willed in general. He's not a bad guy. He's a hero, like, and you want to see him succeed. You want to see him escape. You want to see him run off into the sunset with his bag of cash. But no, he gets caught up and it ends tragically. It's that sort of thing where it's like you have a good-willed person who is rolling dice with something that is way beyond his power to resist.
Well said.
It's bleak.
Well, if you like what you hear, go ahead and give us 3 Silmarils. Oh, any final thoughts? Any other?
Well,
Well, there was one thing about the Palantir, which I think we should chat.
before we get to the Palantir, really quickly, we have a little short history of, the tree in Gondor, the White Tree of Gondor, which is at the bottom of 291. So it says, the White Tree was grown from the fruit of Nimloth the Fair. That's the one that was in Numenor before Sauron burned it. And Nimloth was descended from the tree of Tirion. There was an image of the eldest of trees, White Telperion, which Yavanna caused to grow in the land of the Valar. So there's 3 trees, and the tree of Gondor descends from Valinor. But I'm curious how. Like, is it a part of it, or the tree of Tirion? How did the White Tree in Numenor descend from the tree of Tirion? That's what I'm confused about.
They took something, I can't remember if it was a leaf or fruit
From Tirion? I'm talking about the Numenorian tree. How is that descended from Tirion? The tree of Tirion.
It's a good question.
Yeah, it's just interesting.
Let's see if the word trees is in the index. What do you think?
Tirion.
Dan, why don't you say your thing about the Palantir?
Yeah,
Okay,
I'll look it
so-
up on Arda while we're listening.
In the Lord of the Rings, when you're like, it's hard to kind of grasp like the stakes of them in the movie. It's hard to grasp the stakes of like, don't look at the Palantir. And I think that this really helps grab that and up the stakes. Gandalf says in the movie something to the effect of that, they're not all accounted for, and we don't know who else may be watching.
Right.
But it's like, okay, so someone else might be on the other line. So it's like a tapped line. You think of like a tapped phone line, government listening in, okay. But here, it's more than that. It's like, I mean, there's proximity to, like, it's not just touching the Palantir where the thing can see you. It's like things nearby, which is why in the movie they kind of hint at that with it being covered, and then they uncover it, and then you touch it, and then you see. But it says, for the most part, they revealed only the things near to another kindred stone, for the stones each called to each. But those who possess, and this is where it gets scary, great strength of will and of mind might learn to direct their gaze whither they would. So it's like proximity to, but then it's also, if you're strong enough willed, you can manipulate it. So that's probably how Sauron can do it. It's not, He's not holding a Palantir. He just has the ability to kind of tap into its far-seeing. It's kind of scary.
It's like he's using Starlink.
Yeah.
And we're
He's
just
Elon
stuck
Musk.
Yeah.
I wonder if Sauron could see the Master Stone, which is on the shores of Valinor. I wonder if he'd be able to see that if it was uncovered. That'd be interesting. If he could like peek into those shores.
One other thing with this, Dan, this whole point with the Palantir is this is like a great advantage in any kind of conflict with Sauron, and they just kind of fumble it. Like they how could he ever successfully assault them if they can see everything that happens on the edges of their realm?
Yeah, it's amazing. And also just it speaks into Saruman's pride. His pride that he can go into there and like somebody on the other end who can like with the strength of their will can manipulate its vision. That's his pride was just so big.
All right, I've got an answer for these trees.
Tell me.
So Telperion is the one that was the one of the 2 trees that was destroyed by Morgoth. Galathilion is the tree of Tirion, and it didn't come from Telperion. It was just made in Telperion's image after
Gotcha.
Telperion was lost. But then
But
after
says
that, it was
descended
like
from it.
No, there's 3 trees,
says-
Dan. I think you're thinking about the 3rd tree.
Okay.
So I was just wondering between the 1st and the 2nd tree, what that relationship was.
first
The
and
white
second.
tree.
So the
Wait, there's 4
know,
trees.
there are 4
There's
trees, but the,
the white tree, the tree in Numenor, the tree of Tyrion, and Telperion.
But the tree of Tyrion wasn't actually descended from Telperion. It was just it was made
In
in
its image.
So
Okay.
this lineage is 3. Man, we're talking a lot about this tree.
Oh yeah, no. Remember, we did talk about that Yavanna caused to grow in the land of Valar. She came in and like made things that were ruined, right? And one of the things was the tree.
Yeah, I'm curious how the trees descend from that tree. Yeah, it looks like the 2nd was made in the image of the 1st. And then the 3rd, I don't know why the 3rd and the 2nd one are related, but someone can tell us in Discord.
I think it was just that it was like a gift from the Valar or something, or from the Eldar to Numenor to have that connection.
Gotcha.
And then we read earlier that Isildur took one of the fruit from that tree, and took it to Minas Ithil or whatever it is. You know, I have to say, with the trees, as soon as they start talking about Telperion, the first of the 2 trees, or like the two trees in Valinor, you already knew, like, oh, must be the connection with the tree in Gondor, even if you never read the book, right?
Mm-hmm. Totally, it's iconic.
Yeah. All right, well, we'll leave it there. Almost there, almost all the way through of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. So, if you like what you hear, go ahead and rate us 9 Rings of the Men out of 9, and follow us everywhere before the Fellowship. Join the discussion on Discord, and send any comments or questions to beforethefellowship@gmail.com. Join us next week as we read the greatest story you've never heard, The Silmarillion by J.R.R. Tolkien.
By Guy K.